Thanks so much, Jackie. It's such an honor to share the stage, so to speak, with all of these incredible leaders in the field, and especially you. Thank you for all of the work that you do. Food Tank is a research and advocacy organization, and what we do is try to highlight stories of hope and success in the food system all over the world. Like all of us, I've been grounded since the pandemic, and my coping mechanism has been to do what I kind of do best, which is to listen to more than 200 experts from around the world as part of Food Tank's weekly live casts and podcasts since the pandemic began. And I've been learning how they're able to pivot, innovate, and imagine a better food system despite the terrible tragedy of COVID-19. I've talked to folks like Maximo Torero, the chief economist at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. I've seen him tear up about how he and his colleagues are really working to divert an impending famine and hunger. I've spoken to pig farmers in Iowa who are grappling with watching their neighbors suffer because of the closure of meat processing plants as a result of the pandemic. So just speaking to a wide range of actors and stakeholders in the food system. One of the things that I'm hearing, and I'll talk about several things that I think are trends that are happening because of the pandemic. But one thing that I've been hearing is that for many parts of the global South, farmers, businesses, scientists, and policymakers, and really all of us are flying blind in a sense because of a lack of data on the number of people infected in places like Malawi or Tanzania, Honduras, or Bangladesh and elsewhere. It's really been hard to determine what the economic and social impact on food systems in those countries and so many others will be. Farmers certainly can't work from home like I do, so I think it will take us much longer, as sort of Keith indicated, to understand how deeply our food and agriculture systems are going to be impacted. On the other hand, I'm seeing incredible innovation because of the pandemic. And that innovation is what I hope will set the stage for what the food system looks like post-COVID-19. So I just want to talk about 4 things that I've been seeing and hearing from my discussions with farmers, researchers, and leaders all over the world. The first is I think we can find more ways to combine high and low tech strategies for ensuring food and nutrition security. We've known for a long time that farmers are already doing this in fields. They're, using cell phone technology along with indigenous agricultural practices. But I think one thing that has come to light is that regional farming systems have become more important than ever because of supply chain disruptions. And in Lebanon, for example, I talked to members of 2 Facebook groups who have organized to provide a platform to barter food because the financial crisis there was further exacerbated by the pandemic and of course the explosion in Beirut in August. So being able to use technology in different ways to ensure food security, I think, has become very important. Farmers in the United States are using Zoom like we are today instead of sharing information, at farmers markets or in shops. Old-fashioned phone trees are allowing farmers to call on one another when they need help. One thing that I've found inspiring in the United States is how young farmers groups are working with older farmers to, trade services like selling the older farmers produce at farmers markets so that those older farmers are not exposed to the virus. And of course, digital technologies and drones are helping farmers during this critical time. Jeff Huckabee is the president of a very large organic farm in California in the United States. And he has been using drones to monitor soil health and water, sort of eliminating the need for his workers or he himself to go out into fields and harvest before they need to. So I think there's a real opportunity there to use technology in more strategic ways. The second point I want to make is how the pandemic has really made what was once invisible in the food system now incredibly visible. It's really no secret that those folks who are harvesting, slaughtering, processing, preparing, distributing, and selling food are putting their lives at risk, again, for all of us. Their essentialness, we call them essential workers in the United States, cannot be denied, nor can the unfair and unjust labor practices and low wages that have made them vulnerable to the virus. La Via Campesina is one of the largest farmers movements in the world. And they say that for decades, governments did little to protect small farms and food producers, and who have been pushed out by bigger entities. But those small and medium-sized farmers have really kept communities fed during the pandemic and helped them pivot from providing. Those farmers have had to really pivot from providing restaurants or other institutions with wholesale food, and are now selling directly to consumers. And the role of migrant and farm workers and food workers all along the supply chain has really been exposed. Again, many of them were on the front lines of COVID-19. They face low wages and poor working conditions. There are groups like One Fair Wage and others that are calling for a minimum living wage to help these workers and to also give them a stronger and louder voice so that they don't remain unseen after the pandemic ends. In my opinion, it's not enough to pay these folks what we call hazard or hero pay. They need to be seen and heard and honored for their work and respected, and they need to be mobilized collectively so that they can fight as a united front for the rights that they deserve. Another trend, which the earlier panel mentioned, is the increased interest in food for health and food as medicine. We're really learning every day how diet-related diseases like diabetes and heart disease make it more difficult to fight off or recover from COVID-19. Many experts, including Satya Tripathi, the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations Environment Program, and Marie Haga from the International Fund for Agricultural Development, are really calling for greater agricultural diversity for both the health of people and the planet. And these were things that they were calling for long before the pandemic began. Groups, we talked to a group in Kenya called Tule Vima, which means Let's Eat Right. And it's run by a nutritionist named Maureen Makutha. And her mission is really to help teach young women to grow indigenous vegetables and sack gardens or vertical gardens where they can grow food on different levels. So they're able to, have more nutritious diets during COVID-19, just as they were before COVID-19, and they're able to have an extra source of income. Maureen has also been giving what she calls nutrition health talks that incorporate information about hand washing and hygiene to keep people safe. And I think that really demonstrates how we can no longer really separate our food and health sectors. They can't be siloed. And while more diversity and eating the rainbow keeps us healthier, farmers need more financial and economic incentives to diversify their agricultural practices. Post-COVID, I think many nations, as Keith said before, should be rethinking policy, and maybe one of those policies is subsidy programs to ensure that citizens are properly nourished and they can ward off future health crises. That's why the work that ICRISAT does with the Smart Food Program is so important, convincing eaters and policymakers alike that the benefits of indigenous and traditional crops are really multifaceted, including being economically profitable. And the last point I just want to make is that because of COVID and inherent racism and inequality in the United States and many other countries, many eaters or consumers are becoming more enlightened and more informed about the food system, and they're becoming more and more vocal. We're calling them citizen eaters. And citizen eaters are people who not only vote with their forks or their dollars or pesos or rupees for what kind of food system but they want, but they're also voting with their actual votes. They're making decisions at the ballot box that will change how the food system looks. And I think, again, we can't unsee the injustices that COVID has exposed. And I really think there's no going back to normal. Normal left us very vulnerable and widened the cracks in a food system already much in need of repair. So now is our time to pivot and develop long-lasting solutions that I think will help nourish both people and the planet. Thanks so much, Jackie.
Thank you, Danny. I have one question for you, and it's linked to COVID-19. As you say, things have changed and they will likely stay changed. We're doing things very differently. And you mentioned more local producers, different supply chains, and all of that going on. do you have any indication in the areas in which you're working whether women and youth are positively impacted just the same as anybody else, or adversely impacted by these different supply chains? Because we're noticing, I'm in India at the moment, I've been in the UK, and I've noticed that we're tending to pick up on the e-commerce, the deliveries. It's different. It's not the same sources of food that one would have normally chosen. You look for other benefits from the supplier, deliveries or whatever. How do you think it's affecting women and youth? Better, worse, neutral?
You know, I think it remains to be seen. I think, you know, when we look at COVID-19, women and young people have had to bear a great burden, women, especially women and girls, because of inequality. And, you know, women typically eat less in households, as do girls. I think there's more of a work burden placed on women. So I think, you know, once we're on the other side of this, really being able to look back at the data, and I think that's really critical. There's not only a lack of data on the number of people infected by COVID-19 in many countries, but there's a lack of data on how our different, you know, parts of the food system are being affected. And I know people, you know, like at IFPRI and other parts of and ICRISAT and many other organizations are looking at this, but I think it kind of remains to be seen. I'm wondering how it will impact especially women, but also youth. So I don't have a good answer for that.
Thank you.